resolution to authorize an independent investigation into this weekend's chemical weapons attack in Duma. Of course, Russia did what Russia usually does. It protected the Syrian regime by vetoing the resolution. Now, the inquiry would have been relatively toothless, but at least a first step toward holding the perpetrator responsible. But if history is any guide, the UN's findings, whatever they may have been, were unlikely to spur action. This isn't the first time the UN has ordered such an inquiry. In 2014, the UN published the findings of a similar inquiry on the chemical weapons attack in Ghouta. That was the attack that initially crossed Obama's red line, killing as many as 1,400 people, according to some estimates. That report found that the attackers used surface-to-surface missiles to deliver sarin gas, and that the attack came from areas controlled by government forces. The UN findings all but concluded that the attack was carried out by the Assad regime. So what came of those findings? Nothing. In the end, nobody was held accountable for the attack, not by the U.S. and certainly not by the UN. Believe it or not, it gets worse. Next month, the UN is set to hold a chemical weapons disarmament conference. Guess whom is set to preside over it? Syria. I'm not making this up. So from calling inquiry after inquiry to issuing condemnation after meaningless condemnation, the UN is busy metaphorically masturbating while the world is watching yet another chemical weapons attack unfold against innocent civilians. According to a report by the Syrian Network for Human Rights, the Assad regime has used internationally prohibited weapons as many as 200 times. Now you say, that's awful, that's terrible, but it's got nothing to do with me. Actually, as our next guest argues, Assad has managed to normalize the use of chemical weapons to a point where dictators around the world have managed to flout international law without accountability. For example, Kim Jong-un used VX nerve agent to assassinate his half-brother in Malaysia in 2017. And just last month, a nerve agent called Novichok was used to poison a former Russia spy and his daughter in southern England. So what's the point of having international laws if no one's going to enforce them? Let me bring in Dr. Zahar Salul. He is the president and co-founder of Med Global, a group dedicated to bringing medical care to people in war zones and disaster areas. His piece in the Chicago Tribune is very important. It shines a spotlight on this issue. Dr. Salul, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
In your piece, you note, as we just did, that the Assad regime has used prohibited weapons against his own people more than 200 times. To what do you attribute the fact that he seems so willing to use these weapons and ignore international law?
Well, I mean, the simple answer that he is able to use it, and there was no accountability. I mean, he used it multiple times. That was confirmed by the United Nations Security Council. They had joint investigation mission that confirmed that the Syrian government have used sarin gas and chlorine gas multiple times on the Syrian people. The last known time was, a famous time was in Khan Sheikhoun last year. But he continued to use it because there was no accountability and there is no attribution and the perpetrators were not put to justice. And he has the capability, according to everyone that we know, that to produce more chemical weapons. Actually, a few months ago, there was a report that the Syrian government is producing new type of chemical weapons. What really hurts me as a doctor that Syrian doctors and humanitarians are struggling to deal with this overwhelming crisis, the use of chemical weapons. This is something that should not be seen in the 21st century. That Syrian children are suffocating to death in the basement while they're sheltering from the bombing, and they're not able to breathe. They are choking to death. You know, we're seeing these videos coming from Duma. You have families who are sheltering in the basements from the bombing, and then you have chemical weapons drops on them, and they are choking, and some of them are trying to flee on the stairs, and they are dying. I mean, this is something that is horrible, horrifying, should not be witnessed in the 21st century.
No, it shouldn't. To your last point, how difficult